Sydney Women's Vocal Orchestra. We formed as a community choir over 20 years ago to keep alive the story of an extraordinary group of women by singing their songs of survival. Over the years, choristers have come and gone, and some have sadly passed away. To them, we would like to dedicate this presentation. Our prelude to this evening's performance. Prelude by Chopin, Opus 28, number 20. The vocal arrangement of this well-known orchestral piece was created and first performed in a prisoner of war camp in Palembang, Sumatra in 1943 by a remarkable vocal orchestra whose members were female prisoners of the Japanese Imperial Army. But before I start the story, I'd like to warn you that the presentation includes references to war atrocities, which may be disturbing for some of you. I'd also like to draw your attention to this leaflet. Some of you may have picked it up on the way in, and if you haven't, I commend it to your attention. If you scan the QR code on the leaflet, you'll be able to see some slides which illustrate the story we're about to tell you. And I possibly suggest that you wait until after the performance to scan the slide if we want to keep Wayne happy. So, to begin, I invite you to imagine it's February 1942. The Japanese army has bombed Pearl Harbor, Japanese soldiers have invaded the Malay Peninsula and are rapidly advancing on Singapore, the supposedly impregnable British island fortress. The civilian population is crowding onto boats in a desperate attempt to flee the city. Among those crowded onto boats are 65 Australian Army nurses who have refused to leave their patients until ordered to do so by their commanding officers, fearing for the nurses' safety. Little did they know what was to come. Together with about 200 civilian men, women and children, the nurses crowd onto a small, sinister-looking dark grey ship, the Vina Brook, and sail from Singapore harbour with a small flotilla of escape vessels, only to be bombed by the Japanese 24 hours later in the Banker Straits. Many are killed outright or drowned, others manage to scramble to shore after many hours in the water. 23 of the 65 nurses who escaped from Singapore are washed ashore on Raji Beach, Banker Island, where they're captured and massacred by the Japanese. The sole survivor, Vivian, is destined to spend the rest of the war in captivity, together with the other nurses who survived the shipwreck and civilian women and children, firstly in a POW camp in Palembang and later in the notorious Belalau camp. We'll hear more of Vivian's story shortly. The next orchestral piece we will sing for you is Londonderry Air. You may know it as the song Danny Boy. How poignant to reflect on the words of the song with special meaning for the women in captivity so far from home. Oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses dying. It's you must go and I must bide. and I must bide. And so the women learned to bide, to wait, to endure, to tolerate. Conditions in Palembang were atrocious. Tropical diseases are rife and medical supplies are scarce. By 1943, 18 months after their capture, the morale of the women is low. Many have died. Those who remain are exhausted and starving. It's in this environment that Nora Chambers, a graduate of the Royal College of Music, and Margaret Dryburgh, a Presbyterian missionary, conceived the idea of a vocal orchestra to recreate popular classical pieces that they'd so loved before the war. The idea is simple, but the execution is extremely difficult. They have no musical instruments. Paper is an extremely short supply, so their musical arrangements have to be scribbled on whatever scraps they can scavenge in the camp. As writing is forbidden, the scores have to be kept hidden at all time. Each vocal section is forced to rehearse separately and in secret because meetings in large groups is forbidden. As one Australian survivor, Nurse Betty Jeffrey, later recalled, Nora Chambers and Margaret Dryburgh sat at the table and one was humming the tune, the other wrote the tune down. We were all given little bits of paper, just your line written. Yet somehow, in these most inauspicious of conditions, they create arrangements of surprising beauty. And in the Dutch kitchen at night, Nora Chambers rehearses her orchestra. As Betty Jeffries wrote in her diary, to sit on logs or stools or tables in the crude old atap-roofed kitchen with only one light, and then to be lifted right out of that atmosphere with this music is sheer joy. It's so easy to forget one is a prisoner. We move forward to December 1943. The choir's first performance is at a concert staged in the camp shortly after Christmas. They have no idea how their Japanese captors will react. The concert has begun when one of the soldiers arrived with bayonet fixed to his rifle. He is clearly furious. They hear the ugly, raw voice of an angry guard. Bravely, the women keep singing. The soldier advances and stands face to face with the singing choir. As the music swells to a crescendo, the guard remains as still as the audience and remains motionless for the rest of the program. Perhaps he's as lonely as the women, cut off from his family in Japan, caught up in the idiocy of war. The first song the choir sang at his first performance was the Largo from Dvorak's New World Symphony. We'd like to sing it for you now. Colin has left us an eyewitness account of that first performance. The singers sat on little stools, too weak from malnutrition and disease to stand for a long time. They wore faded patched dresses or shorts and sun tops. They were barefoot. Bandages around their legs covered tropical sores. Nora Chambers raised her hands. Very softly as through a haze, the first chords of the Largo of the New World Symphony reached us listeners, packed together in the compound. Some of us wept. We had not expected such beauty among the cockroaches, the rats, the bedbugs, the lice, and the smell of the latrines. The concert renewed our sense of human dignity and gave us courage to go on. The women strive valiantly to maintain their sense of beauty and civilization in these appalling conditions. They hoard rice from their meagre rations to make a birthday cake for one of their fellows, which they decorate with flowers they find growing around the compound. They embroider hankies with threads pulled from the rags they wear, making gifts for one another with whatever they have. They hold tea parties with a menu composed of imaginary food. And of course they have their music to sustain them. As Nora Chambers later wrote, the idea was to bring singers together, Dutch, British, Australian, to make music to uplift us and perhaps to bring some beauty and sanity. In their driving for beauty and sanity among the hell of the camp, we're reminded of the cry of the suffragettes, "Give us bread, but give us roses." And we'll now bring you a small bouquet of roses from A Country Garden by Percy Grainger. To introduce you to our vocal orchestra. You'll recall that each section of the original orchestra had to rehearse separately as large gatherings were forbidden. This is how we put together Ravel's Bolero section by section, with part one, the melody.
Whoops. You ready?
Okay, and parts 2 and 3 combining for this piece to provide the harmony. And on percussion, we have part 4, or as we like to call them, the well-rounded bottoms.
And so on and so on and so on.
Okay, so we'll now have the distinct advantage, as we've had the distinct advantage of rehearsing together, hopefully we'll stay together to bring you the theme from Ravel's Bolero. Earlier, I introduced you to Vivian, the only survivor of the Banker Island massacre. For many years, it was believed that those 23 brave nurses walked into the sea with their heads held high to face death by machine gun fire. It's only very recently that the awful truth has come to light. The nurses, including Vivian, were raped and tortured before being massacred. As the lone survivor, Vivian was ordered by well-meaning army officers not to reveal the truth at the war crimes hearings after the war, so she remained a prisoner of silence, telling the secret to only a trusted few at the end of her long life. And no one was held to account for the crimes on Raji Beach. As so often happened, it was the victims who suffered and not the perpetrator. A sculpture honouring Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Bullwinkle was erected last year in Canberra, the first sculpture to commemorate the service of an individual woman to be erected in the grounds of the Australian War Memorial. This is our tribute, Song for Vivian, composed by our choir director, Christina Momoki.
Sole survivor, lucky doubter, what is this stained red shoreline, the pain you endured, but the shame
Orchestra continued to perform through much of 1944, by which time half its members had perished and the rest was simply too weak to continue. Of the 65 Australian nurses who left Singapore, just 24 returned home. Sadly, Margaret Dryburgh did not survive the war, dying in July 1945, shortly before the cessation of hostilities. So how did the music live on? Well, at the end of the war, when the remaining prisoners were liberated, the scores were smuggled out by Helen Collins' sister, Antoinette. The music had to be smuggled because, ironically, the British destroyed every piece of written material brought out of the camp. Annette Collin donated the music to Stanford University, California, where it remained forgotten until 1980, when it was rediscovered by the university's women's choir. Since then, the suffering and heroism of the women of the vocal orchestra has captured the world's imagination. Their story has commemorated on film, most notably as Bruce Beresford's Paradise Road, on stage, in published histories and diaries, and at least one novel. Margaret Dryburgh and Nora Chambers orchestrated some 30 pieces of classical music during their incarceration, an amazing achievement given the conditions they faced. The works the women sang were all orchestral pieces with one exception. The only original composition to survive the war was the Captive's Hymn, composed by Miss Dryburgh in the early days of their internment. The hymn was sung at church services every Sunday and at the all too frequent funerals. The words are a tribute to the courage and humanity of the women of the vocal orchestra. It speaks of their hopes and yearnings for freedom. Considering their daily privations and oppression, it's astonishingly free of any bitterness. Since the end of the war, it's become an unofficial anthem for survivors groups everywhere. Wherever the Captive's Hymn was sung in the camps, the women stood. We invite you to stand as we sing our final song, Margaret Dryburgh's Captive's Hymn, to honour the brave women of the original vocal orchestra.